So let me get this straight. We've got two letters here, one from September 26th from Jim Dunham, the Democratic leader of the House, and then a few days later from the lobbyist Arlene Wohlgemuth, a letter in response. And as far as I can understand it, Dunham is saying he's upset because Republicans are working against Democrats, or what is his point?
Well, I think he had 2 points in his initial letter, which came out this week. The first was that he was upset that a Republican House member, Dan Branch, was joining with other Republicans in the legislature, in the House, and I know he mentioned one senator, to campaign against Alan Vaught, a Democrat, and specifically to throw a fundraiser for former Representative Bill Keffer, who wants back the seat that Vaught now holds. And Dunham claims that Vaught did not want to get involved in campaigning against Dan Branch, and so why should Dan Branch be involved in a fundraiser for Alan Vaught?
There's sort of a gentleman's agreement here over history that incumbents won't run against other incumbents, or help other incumbents, opponents to other incumbents.
Right. He basically says that this sort of violates the unwritten rules of the House. Now, the other thing that he was upset about is he says that a former House member, Arlene Wohlgemuth, is recruiting an opponent to run in the Republican primary against Representative Jim Keffer. Now, Jim Keffer is the brother of Bill Keffer, incidentally, and is also one of the Republicans who has announced that he's going to run for House Speaker. And Jim Dunham says that Arlene Wohlgemuth is working on behalf of Speaker Tom Craddick. And he also, in an unusual move, I think, this whole deal is unusual, called out some of Arlene Wohlgemuth's lobby clients. Now, Arlene Wohlgemuth responded, right? Yeah,
Arlene Wohlgemuth sends back a letter and says basically, she understands that he should know, Dunham should know as a lawyer, that some things aren't nice to say, and in particular, she's extremely disappointed with the idea of threatening her clients. I think you mentioned that he listed in his letter all of her lobby clients as wondering what they would think of her getting involved in this sort of thing. My problem is figuring out how this means anything in the real world.
Well, then there was a third letter, don't forget, that Frank Court, the chairman of the Republican caucus, sort of Dunham's counterpart, sent, although I think we all know who the real chairman of the Republican caucus is, but be that as it may, Frank Court sent a letter saying, I don't know what world Jim Dunham's living in, but we Republicans have a right to work for a Republican majority and to get involved in the electoral process. And so what does this all mean? Well, not a whole lot, although it does sort of, I think, illustrate the interesting nature of this coalition, if you will. I don't even know if you can call it a coalition at this point, but this group of people who want a speaker other than Tom Craddick. You sort of, not directly, but you sort of have Jim Dunham, a liberal Democrat and head of the Democratic caucus, coming to the defense of Jim Keffer, a conservative Republican.
That's right.
Who up until recently was a lieutenant of House Speaker Tom Craddick.
And I think I've heard it said just in our newsroom by the great Leland Copeland that the coalition against Tom Craddick lacks a leader.
And maybe it does, and that's certainly something that it sort of seemed like it did at the end of the legislative session, and to some degree at the beginning of the legislative session, and the coalition against Tom Craddick didn't work that time. It certainly seems to have recruited some people since then, and maybe it will this time. We don't know.
Who's sending the next letter? Do you expect a letter from Craddick, or what happens next?
I would imagine that Craddick will probably publicly stay out of this, although to think that he is completely out of it at the moment, I think would be a little naive.
Lots of fundraising going on in the House races. That's all I know about.
Yeah, stay tuned. A lot of time between now and January 2009.